Welcome to History Odyssey. Have you ever wondered how a small-time street vendor who sold dog meat ended up on the Dragon Throne and built one of the most powerful dynasties in Chinese history? This isn't mythology, this is the Han Dynasty. From 206 BC, when Liu Bang founded his empire in the ashes of the Qin, to 220 AD, when the last Han emperor was forced to abdicate, this dynasty lasted 426 years. But it wasn't just a dynasty. It's the reason the Chinese people call themselves the Han people today. It's why the Chinese script is called Hànzì, why the language is called Hànyǔ, and why the ancient trade network connecting China to the world is called the Silk Road. Today we're going to cover the full 426-year rise and fall of the Han Dynasty in one go. From a peasant rebel's unlikely conquest of an empire, to the opening of the Silk Road, the chaos of imperial in-laws seizing power, eunuchs running the government, and the curtain rising on the Three Kingdoms era. If you're into history, hit subscribe and turn on the bell. That way you won't miss it when we drop a new video. The peasant emperor, from street vendor to son of heaven. So here's the situation. In 209 BC, China was on fire. The first emperor of Qin had just died, leaving the throne to his incompetent son, Qin, a young man who had absolutely no idea how to run an empire. With the Chancellor Zhao Gao pulling the strings behind the scenes, the mighty Qin Empire was rotting from the inside out. Then a farmer named Chen Sheng stood up and shouted a line that would echo through Chinese history. Are kings and nobles born or made? It was the spark that lit the first mass peasant uprising in Chinese history. That one shout woke up every grievance in the land. Rebel armies rose up across the country, but two figures stood out above the rest. One was Xiang, aristocratic, brilliant, and terrifyingly effective in battle. The other was Liu Bang, the dog meat vendor. Now Liu Bang, let's be honest here, he couldn't fight like Xiang, he couldn't strategize like Zhang Liang, and he couldn't govern like Xiao He. But he had one ability that none of them possessed. He knew his own limits, and he knew how to use people. In a time of chaos, that skill was worth more than anything. In 207 BC, Liu Bang's forces were first to breach the Qin capital of Xianyang. The Qin emperor surrendered. Just like that, the Qin Empire was gone. But Liu Bang knew the real fight was still coming. Xiang arrived with 400,000 troops and invited Liu Bang to a banquet at Hongmen, a dinner that was less invitation and more assassination attempt. Liu Bang survived only because of some quick thinking from his advisor Zhang Liang and his bodyguard Fan Kuai. The banquet at Hongmen has been a byword for a dangerous invitation ever since. What followed was 4 years of war, the legendary Chu-Han contention. Xiang Yu was an almost supernatural fighter, winning battle after battle, but he had a fatal flaw. He was arrogant, refused to listen to advice, and couldn't retain talented people. Liu Bang, on the other hand, kept losing battles and kept gaining followers. Han Xin, Zhang Liang, Xiao He, the three men later called the three heroes of early Han, all found their greatest purpose under Liu Bang's command. In 202 BC, the decisive battle came at Gaixia. Han Xin surrounded Xiang Yu's forces with the 10-sided ambush. That night, the Han soldiers sang Chu folk songs from every direction, and the psychological blow shattered what was left of Xiang Yu's army. Xiang Yu broke through the encirclement and reached the banks of the Wu River, but with only a handful of riders left and nowhere to go, he drew his sword and took his own life. He was 31 years old. And so Liu Bang unified China, founded the Han Dynasty, and made Chang'an his capital. History would remember him as Emperor Gaozu of Han. The year was 202 BC. The Wen-Jing Golden Age, the empire catches its breath. Here's the thing though, the brand new Han Dynasty was a disaster zone. The wars at the end of the Qin had left the Central Plains in ruins. Historical records tell us that Emperor Gaozu couldn't even find 4 horses of the same color to pull his imperial carriage. The general population had it even worse: population collapse, abandoned farmland, and severe food shortages across the board. Faced with this, Liu Bang took a deeply pragmatic approach. Let the people recover. He slashed taxes, loosened laws, avoided big construction projects, and avoided new wars. He let the wound breathe. This governing philosophy, later called Huang Lao thought, was essentially the art of not doing too much, governing by getting out of the way. But after Liu Bang died, the dynasty ran into a problem. His empress, Liu Ji, started running the show. Empress Liu was a formidable political operator and a genuinely terrifying one. She had Liu Bang's favorite consort, Lady Qi, mutilated and thrown into a latrine in an act so brutal that even her own son, Emperor Hui, reportedly fell ill with shock upon seeing it. For nearly 15 years, Empress Liu dominated the court, packing it with members of her Liu clan and effectively sidelining the entire Liu imperial family. Then she died, and the ministers immediately launched a coup, wiped out the Liu clan, and placed a new emperor on the throne, Liu Heng, known to history as Emperor Wen. Emperor Wen and his son, Emperor Jing, together created one of the most celebrated golden ages in Han history, the Wen-Jing era. Both were famously frugal, hard-working, and genuinely concerned with the welfare of ordinary people. They kept taxes light, encouraged agriculture, and stayed out of expensive wars. After a few decades of this, the imperial granaries were overflowing, and the treasury was so full that the cords used to string the copper coins had rotted away. That accumulated wealth was about to meet its match. Emperor Wu, the dynasty at its blazing peak. Now we need to talk about Emperor Wu of Han, Liu Che, because if the Han Dynasty was a fire, Liu Che was the man who stoked it to its highest and most dangerous point. Just remember, the hotter the fire burns, the faster it consumes itself. In 141 BC, Liu Che ascended the throne at just 16 years old. He inherited an empire of enormous accumulated wealth, and immediately made clear he had no interest in his predecessor's careful, restrained approach. He was ambitious, aggressive, and hungry. Emperor Wu's greatest achievement was his campaign against the Xiongnu. Before him, Han had dealt with the Xiongnu, the nomadic confederation that dominated the northern steppe, through hekin, or marriage diplomacy. Send a princess to the Xiongnu chief, throw in silk and grain, buy a few years of peace on the border. It was effective but humiliating, and Emperor Wen and Emperor Jing tolerated it because they had to. The empire wasn't strong enough to fight. Emperor Wu was strong enough. He had the money, the grain, and the men. He chose to fight. He found his generals in two remarkable figures, Wei-Qing and Qubing. Wei-Qing had started life as a stable hand, the younger brother of Emperor Wu's favorite consort, and rose to become Grand Marshal on the strength of his battlefield genius. Qubing was Wei-Qing's nephew, a military prodigy who led his first campaign at 17 and shattered Xiongnu forces deep in the steppe. He's remembered for saying, "While the Xiongnu are not yet destroyed, what right do I have to a home?" He died at 24, and China mourned. But behind this blaze of glory, the costs were mounting fast. Years of massive military campaigns had burned through almost everything the Wen-Jing era had saved. To fund the wars, Emperor Wu nationalized salt and iron, taxed merchants more heavily, and even introduced a policy encouraging citizens to report wealthy businessmen to the government, creating exactly the kind of fearful, suspicious atmosphere that kills economic activity. And this, it turned out, was only the beginning of the empire's troubles. The Zhao-Xuan revival, one last breath of brilliance. In his final years, Emperor Wu was consumed by the witchcraft scandal, a paranoid purge that ended with his own crown prince driven to suicide. On his deathbed, he named his 8-year-old son as successor, Emperor Zhao, and appointed the steady, loyal Guang as regent. Guang, the half-brother of the legendary Qubing, proved to be one of the most capable power brokers in Han history. He guided Emperor Zhao and later championed Emperor Xuan, engineering what historians call the Zhao-Xuan revival, a period of genuine recovery and stabilization after the damage of Emperor Wu's later years. Emperor Xuan was a remarkable ruler, and his backstory is extraordinary. He was the grandson of the crown prince who had been driven to suicide in the witchcraft scandal, meaning he'd grown up outside the palace, among ordinary people. He knew what life actually looked like for his subjects. He cracked down on corruption, reformed the bureaucracy, and brought the Han Empire to one final peak of strength and prosperity. But after Huo Guang died, Emperor Xuan moved swiftly to destroy the Huo family on charges of treason. The experience left him deeply suspicious of powerful imperial in-laws for the rest of his life. That suspicion, unfortunately, did not survive him. The Wang clan, Wang Mang, and the dynasty's interruption. After Emperor Xuan came Emperor Yuan, a man of irresolute character who preferred listening to Confucian scholars debate theory over actually governing. Power drifted steadily toward the empress's family and the eunuchs. The emperors that followed came and went with alarming speed. One shorter-lived and more ineffective than the last. The real power brokers were the maternal clans of the empresses, what the Chinese call the outer relatives. The most powerful of these was the Wang clan. Wang Mang was their figurehead, a man who projected humility and spouted Confucian virtue, but whose ambition had no ceiling. Over decades, he cultivated his reputation while quietly accumulating real power, positioning himself as regent for a succession of child emperors. Then, in 8 AD, he did something that left the entire court speechless. He deposed the infant heir, declared himself emperor, and renamed the dynasty Xin, meaning new. Just like that, the Han Dynasty was over. For now, Wang Mang's reforms were sweeping and idealistic. He tried to redesign Chinese society according to Confucian classical models, and they were a catastrophe. Completely disconnected from economic reality, his policies caused widespread suffering. Then the Yellow River flooded and changed course, triggering famine and locust plagues across the country. Peasant uprisings ignited everywhere. In 23 AD, rebel armies broke into Chang'an. Wang Mang was killed. His Xin dynasty had lasted just 15 years. Guangwu's restoration, the Eastern Han begins again. Into this chaos stepped a descendant of the old Han imperial line. Liu Shu was a ninth-generation descendant of the Han founder Liu Bang, technically royalty, but by his generation so far removed from power that he'd been farming his own land. He had a scholar's bearing and a general's mind, and when the moment came, he seized it. In 25 AD, Liu Shu declared himself emperor in Luoyang, re-establishing the Han Dynasty, now called Eastern Han. History remembers him as Emperor Guangwu. It took him about 10 years to suppress the warlords and reunify the country, a period called Guangwu's restoration. Emperor Guangwu's most celebrated move after winning the civil war was demobilizing it, stripping his generals of their military commands, granting them comfortable titles and generous pensions, and letting them retire in peace. Compared to Liu Bang's approach, which involved executing most of his founding generals, this was both more civilized and more effective. The Eastern Han enjoyed genuine stability under Emperor Ming and Emperor Zhang. The empire flourished, the Silk Road was reopened, and the General Ban Chao spent 30 years in the western regions, carrying the Han name across Central Asia. But Eastern Han had a structural flaw baked in from the very beginning, one that would eventually kill it. Its emperors died young, and they almost always came to the throne as children. Imperial in-laws and eunuchs, the empire's slow poison. The fall of Eastern Han wasn't caused by one bad emperor. It was caused by a vicious cycle that ran for over 100 years. Here's how the cycle worked. A child emperor ascends the throne. The Empress Dowager rules from behind a curtain. The Empress Dowager relies on her own family, the Waqi or imperial in-laws, to run the government. When the emperor grows up and wants his power back, the only people close enough to trust are his personal attendants, the eunuchs. The eunuchs destroy the in-laws, then start their own power grab. The emperor dies young. Another child emperor. The Empress Dowager returns. The in-laws come back. Repeat. Every cycle, the government rotted a little more. Every cycle, the people suffered a little more. In 168 AD, Emperor Ling came to the throne, one of the most inept rulers in Eastern Han history. He openly sold government positions at listed prices. Corruption ran through every level of the court. The imperial machine had essentially stopped working. This was when the rage of ordinary people reached a point no one could contain. In 184 AD, a man named Zhang Jue raised the banner of the Yellow Turbans, preaching that the blue sky is dead The yellow sky shall rise. The Yellow Turban Rebellion swept across the country. Han forces eventually suppressed it, but the cost was enormous. Regional warlords had used the crisis to build private armies and carve out territories for themselves. These men would become the main characters of the Three Kingdoms era. One of them, Dong Zhuo, seized the moment when the eunuchs and imperial in-laws wiped each other out in a power struggle in Luoyang. He marched his western troops into the capital, deposed Emperor Shao, installed a 9-year-old boy, Emperor Xiang, as puppet emperor, and took control of the court. The Han Dynasty existed in name only. The eve of Three Kingdoms, the final curtain. The rest of the story you may already know some of. Dongzhuo's brutality triggered a coalition of warlords across the country. The campaign failed to dislodge him, but it made one thing unmistakably clear to every warlord involved. The Han central government could no longer control anyone. The floodgates opened, China fractured. In the end, it was Cao Cao who figured out the move. By placing Emperor Xian under his protection, effectively using the emperor as a political seal of legitimacy, Cao Cao became the de facto ruler of Han. He spent decades unifying the north and building the state that would become Wei. In 220 AD, Cao Cao's son, Cao Pi, forced Emperor Xian to formally abdicate, declared the Han Dynasty ended, and established the Wei Dynasty. China entered the Three Kingdoms era. The Han Dynasty, 426 years in total, had run its full course. What did it leave behind? It left the name Han people. It left the Chinese script, the Chinese language, the silk trade routes that connected China to the world for centuries. And it left behind a phrase, "Those who offend the might of Han, no matter how far, shall be punished," that still carries an echo of something deep in the Chinese sense of civilizational identity. The rise and fall of Han is, at its core, a story about a question that never gets old. How does a great empire balance the ambition to expand against the rot that sets in from within? Leave me a comment. Which moment from Han history sticks with you most? The banquet at Hongmen, Qubing riding to the edge of the steppe, Ban Chao's 30 years in Central Asia. I want to hear from you. Don't forget to subscribe to History Odyssey and hit the bell. We have a lot more dynasty stories where this came from. I'm History Odyssey. See you next time.